There are two words in the gospel we have just heard that stand out. Two words that are central to Jesus' message. Two special words that are rarely used in the rest of the Christian scriptures. These two words are advocate and orphans. Let's take a closer look at both of them, beginning with the second word, orphans. Orphans is a frightening word, describing children who have lost their parents through death or desertion. Some English Bible translates Jesus' word for orphans as comfortless or desolate. It carries the connotation of being isolated, abandoned, destitute, without protection, alone. It is estimated that in the world today, there are some 153 million orphans. Imagine 153 million. That's equivalent to almost half the population of the United States and more than the entire population of Russia. Millions become orphans because of national and international conflict and natural disasters. The Hebrew scriptures make frequent reference to the need to care for orphans along with widows and foreigners, all among the most vulnerable members of society. This gospel passage that we've heard is taken from Jesus' final teaching to his disciples at the Last Supper. But we might wonder, why is Jesus assuring his followers that they will not be orphans? After all, these are grown men, most of whom had probably already lost their parents. Well, in ancient Israel, the large and extended family was everything. Everyone outside the family was suspected of being an enemy. But by becoming Jesus' followers, the disciples had left their families of origin and joined what scholars call Jesus' fictive family. In other words, their allegiance, the identity, the unity stemming from their family of origins that would have been the basis for their lives has been substituted for in this new community of faith, which is a family with Jesus. And now Jesus is telling them that he will soon be leaving them, for he knows that his death and departure are imminent. Is this the end of his family? Have they left everything to follow him and now they will have nothing? But Jesus reassures them that this will not be the case. And he uses that other unique word that we heard in the gospel passage, advocate. They will not be homeless and need to be cared for by strangers because he will send another advocate to be with them always. The Greek word parakletos, paraclete, literally means called to the side of another. It can have a legal sense like advocate or defense attorney, but generally it refers to a helper, mediator, or intercessor, one who appears on another's behalf. Another nuance is that of comforter, which we hear in the sequence for the Feast of Pentecost, which says, "You of comforters the best." So when Jesus promises, "I am coming to you," he means that in the most intimate sense. Jesus is leaving them, but he will be with them in a more powerful, intimate way through the Holy Spirit. Jesus is promising to give his disciples the one who is the link between Jesus and his Father. Now, everything that Jesus has done through his earthly ministry has been done in the Spirit. That is, empowered by, authorized by, and enabled by the Spirit. So in promising his disciples the Holy Spirit, Jesus is giving them the same link that so closely linked him to the Father. He tells them that this companion, this advocate, this Holy Spirit will abide with you and will be in you. In other words, they will have the same intimate, personal connection with the advocate that they have enjoyed with Jesus. They will not be orphaned because Jesus is the embodiment of a motherly God who never forgets her children and a fatherly God who protects orphans and widows. Now, this brings us to a third key word in this discourse, this time a word that Jesus used frequently, namely love. When Jesus speaks of love, he's not describing some romantic emotional feeling, but rather an action that motivates and directs one to place others at the center of our concern. As St. John cautions us in his first letter, let us love not in word and speech, but in deed and truth. Jesus begins and ends the discourse we heard by saying, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And then the reverse, "Whoever has my commandments and observes them is the one who loves me." And of course, Jesus is not referring to the 10 commandments, but to his 2 great commandments, loving God and our neighbor. And this brings us to 2 things that we remember today, 2 things that are intimately linked together. The first is Mother's Day, with its lesson that parental love at its best is unconditional, and as such is a reflection of God's sacrificial love. If we have been blessed to have experienced this self-giving love, Jesus commands us to extend the same love to others, especially to those who are without love, the poor, the forgotten, the despised. And that takes us to the other event we remember this day, the horrific, racially motivated shooting 1 year ago today, just a few miles from here. Mass shootings have become so frequent in our country that we might overlook the tragedy they involve until it occurs in our backyard. Likewise, there are so many ways in which our sisters and our brothers are victimized that we may forget or become blind to so many of them. War, poverty, hunger, prejudice, the list goes on and on. Conditions that dehumanize so many. Conditions that make so many orphans. Jesus sends the Spirit to enable us to live the new commandment to love one another. No longer alone, forgotten, abandoned, we must now in his name and with his Spirit seek out the lonesome, the forlorn, the lost. Our lives and our world must become a new family, wonderfully full of mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts and cousins abounding. Jesus calls us to see the world and all of those within it as he sees it, as the Father sees it, as one family, one huge, holy family.